Good afternoon. My name is Benjamin Gadan, Director of the Latin America Program here at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. Welcome, and thanks for joining today's dialogue. Bienvenidos y gracias por su participación en la conversación de hoy. I'm delighted to be here today for the second edition of our Argentina Elige series. This latest initiative from our Argentina project provides a platform for high-level conversations about the policy ideas of the top candidates in Argentina's presidential election. This month, in less than 2 weeks, on Sunday, August 13th, Argentina holds its national presidential primaries, known as the PASO, to choose candidates for the October general election. The voting will take place amid a formidable set of challenges. Argentina is suffering from triple-digit inflation, a sluggish economy, crushing debt, and a dramatic scarcity of hard currency, worsened by a historic drought that will cost the country an estimated $20 billion in hard currency earnings. In recent days, the government reached a last-minute agreement with the International Monetary Fund, designed to avoid yet another debt crisis, at least for the next few months. Polls reveal deep pessimism. Views about the state of the country have not been this negative since the 2001-2002 economic collapse. Not surprisingly, in this challenging political context, neither the president, Alberto Fernandez, nor his vice president, former President Cristina Kirchner, are competing in the election. Instead, the ruling Peronist coalition will be represented by the country's powerful economy minister, Sergio Massa. In the general election in October, Massa will surely face the libertarian lawmaker Javier Milei, a political upstart who has amassed a sizable following by bitterly criticizing Argentina's traditional political parties, describing their leaders as indistinguishable members of a political caste. It is less clear who will represent Argentina's mainstream center-right opposition. The primary to choose the candidate of the Juntos por el Cambio coalition is a contest between former President Mauricio Macri's successor as mayor of the city of Buenos Aires, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, and Macri's former security minister, Patricia Bullrich. Both candidates promise major change, including structural reforms to improve Argentina's economic competitiveness, reduce inflation, and break the cycle of overspending that has brought about repeated economic crises under both Peronist and non-Peronist governments. Both say they have learned the lessons from the challenges during the Macri administration, when persistent deficits and rising debt contributed to a run on the peso that led Argentina to negotiate the biggest bailout in IMF history. But in their leadership styles, approach to Peronism, relationships with former President Macri, attitude toward crime, and their favored pace of reform, Rodríguez Larreta and Bullrich differ significantly. Bullrich has visited us here at the Wilson Center several times over the years, including as security minister, when she spoke about the fight against drug trafficking and organized crime. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome her senior economic advisor, the lawmaker Luciano Laspina, so we can learn more about Bullrich's approach to economic issues, arguably the biggest challenges she would face should she be elected president. Laspina is a member of Argentina's Chamber of Deputies. He's the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee and a former chief economist at Banco Ciudad de Buenos Aires. I'm so grateful to McClarty Associates and its regional director, Kezia McKegg, for their partnership in organizing today's discussion, and to my colleagues Beatriz Garcia-Nice and Facundo Robles for their support. Two very quick programming notes before we get started. In our last Argentina Elige dialogue, we spoke to Milei's senior economic advisor, Diana Mondino. You can watch that conversation on our website, wilsoncenter.org/LAP. También puede acceder a una conversación en español que tuvimos con ella para el podcast de nuestro Argentina project. Our next dialogue in the Argentina Elige series will take place next Tuesday, August 8th. It will feature Martín Redrado, a senior economic advisor to Rodríguez Larreta and a former president of Argentina's central bank. Thank you again for joining us today. Before I turn to Luciano, who is joining us from Buenos Aires, I want to invite you to participate in this conversation. You can ask your questions using the Q&A tool on the Wilson Center event website that's directly below the video. Luciano, welcome. Bienvenido.
Thank you. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you to the Wilson Center and to Argentina Project for this invitation.
I want to start by asking you about the experience of Juntos por el Cambio the last time that it governed Argentina. Obviously, there was tremendous enthusiasm in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere when President Macri took office, but things didn't work out quite as planned. What, economically speaking, are the main lessons that the opposition has learned from that experience, and how would that shape the way a Bullrich government would approach an economic turnaround?
Well, I think the scenario in 2016 was quite different to the current situation, and I think we learned many lessons from that experience. You know, exiting populist strategies is always a challenge for any country. Most of the time, you know, failure is the rule rather than the alternative. So we know that to exit these populist strategies, we need to push reform just from the beginning in order to give time to those reforms to reap the benefits of the reforms. In the history of Latin America, and particularly in Argentina, we have many experiences of experiments that try to exit populist government without success. And the lesson of those experiences are that you need a combination of things. And I think this combination of things that are pretty unique in history, particularly in Argentina, will be probably present if Juntos por el Cambio wins the next presidential election, which are basically three. The first one is, of course, a market-friendly government. It's basically to have a rational government in order to have the political willingness to push economic reforms and rational economic reforms. The second one that I think is key is to have majority at both chambers of the Congress, which was not of course, the case during the Macri's administration. We have a extreme minority at both chambers, so we had to veto. Macri has to veto a couple of laws even during the first years of his administration. And I think this time around, if we are successful in the first round of the elections, Juntos por el Cambio will be very close to have own quorum at both chambers of the Congress, not only at the lower house but also at the Senate, which will be the first time since the recovery of democracy in the 80s that a non-Peronist party will control the Senate. And the third one is luck, in the sense that you need to have a positive external environment, a positive external context in order to have positive results in the short term of the economics reforms that you will push during the administration. And I think these three unique conditions were present during the first years of Menem Cavallo, maybe during the first years of Kirchner-Lavagna at the beginning of the 2000s. I think will be present if Patricia Bullrich wins the next presidential election, meaning the leadership for push structural reforms, majority at both chambers, and I could say a unique international context for Argentina during the next 10 or 20 years. Of course, we have this blast of natural resources related to a process that has started at world scale, which is the decarbonization of the economy, the electrification, and so on, and the energy transition. So the world is demanding all that Argentina will have in the future, which is sun, wind, natural gas in the transition, and of course the critical minerals you need to electrification, particularly lithium and copper. And we have all of that, and we will receive a lot of huge real investment. And that is, I would say that is quite different to the scenario we received in 2016. It was very common to receive investors, but they were generally financial investors that want to buy bonds, Argentine bonds. Now I spend a lot of time receiving real investors that have huge investment projects for Argentina in case we put the rules that in order to improve FDI, and not only FDI, also local investment in Argentina. So we will be, I think going to your question, I think the scenario is quite different in political terms, but also in economic terms. It is, of course, more challenging in the very short term because macroeconomic instability is, of course, a huge problem right now, and it's much more bigger than it was during 2015 and 2016. But I think the political and the international scenario is better than it was during the 2006, 2019 experience. So our idea, to sum up this first question, is that we will have to tackle all the reforms just from the beginning in order to put the conditions for economic growth with a couple of key structural reforms that will try to promote investment, employment, and deregulation of the economy just from the beginning.
Luciano, it seems that whoever is elected president will need to rationalize spending if Argentina has any hope of lowering inflation and ultimately returning to capital markets. That said, there are lots of different opinions about the proper sequencing and speed of that adjustment. My question for you, from the perspective of the Bullrich campaign, is what should be done first and how fast?
Well, yes. The next government will have to face three main challenges in the very short term, which is the strategy to exit capital controls, the challenge to reduce fiscal deficit, particularly to cut public spending. That, as you know, public spending in terms of GDP doubled during the 20 years of Kirchnerism. And the third one is to realign relative prices, not only the effects, which we already have a 100% effects cap between the legal official effects rate and the parallel effects rate, but also other key relative prices, particularly fuels and energy and transport tariffs, which is also not only a political challenge, but also a social challenge going forward. So, of course, the sequencing for the reforms are quite difficult to anticipate right now because we really don't know what will be the scenario at the beginning of our government, because the government, the Alberto Fernandez government is running out of reserves. So it's quite difficult to anticipate how this government will get to the end of the year without a crisis. But in any scenario, I think we need to tackle the reforms just from the beginning. And I think the one of the biggest challenges is, of course, the strategy to exit capital controls without having a huge acceleration of inflation at the beginning. And we think that to avoid a higher acceleration of inflation, of the rate of inflation during the next year, we need to exit capital controls without a clear path for fiscal correction. We eventually, with an agreement with the International Monetary Fund, just from the beginning, in order to build some credibility and to have the seal of approval for a reasonable fiscal path going forward. And if we can do that, I think the cost of exiting capital controls will be lower for Argentina. In my view, the sequencing, of course, will require some management of the process of deregulation of capital controls at the beginning. But in our view, and particularly the political views of Patricia Bullrich, is very clear. We need to exit capital controls very fast in order not to postpone the solution of the problems of Argentina another year. And also we need to, benefit from the positive rebound of export that we will have next year because of the crop, because of the first exports of lithium, and also because of the compression of the gas pipeline during the winter that will also reduce the net energy imports next year. Taking all that into account, we anticipate a rebound of net export close to $30 billion, coming from close to 70 billion dollars this year, $75 billion next year. So it's a huge increase in export, and I think we will need to benefit from that rebound in export in order to help the stabilization process. Of course, the stabilization effort and the stabilization plan itself will have to take place only after we deliver the correction of fiscal accounts, basically to the reduction of elimination, if you want, of the primary deficit of the national treasury, and also the realignment of relative prices, not only exiting capital controls and unifying the FX rate, but also the realignment of public utility tariffs. If we can do that very fast, I think we can after that go to the second stage of our program, which is the stabilization plan itself. The stabilization will probably take place after these corrections have been done, and we'll basically have a cornerstone, which is the reform of the central bank charter, with basically three main principles. The first one is total independency of the central bank from politicians. The second rule is the prohibition to print money for the treasury. And the third rule, which is key in Argentina, is a prohibition to impose capital controls in the future. Why? Because capital controls, and particularly the cepo, as we said here in Argentina, is basically the default of the currency. It's basically to avoid the full convertibility of our currency, and that creates a quasi-currency every time Argentina has a negative shock. And that also creates self-fulfilling prophecies, because if you have the possibility to impose capital controls by decree, every time you have a political shock or even an external shock, you start to have a currency run, because people anticipate in Argentina the imposition of capital controls in the future. And that's happened very clearly in 2019, when Mauricio Macri lost the primary elections in August 2019. And we have a 23% depreciation of the currency the next Monday. So we need to give to the peso holders and to the money demand the commitment and the clear rules of the game for the rules that will manage money printing in the future, and the conditions of a new central banks to manage the peso in Argentina. That will be key to restore credibility going forward in the peso, and to stabilize, of course, the peso and reduce inflation. And in a sense, that is all Latin American did during the 80s and the 90s. And some countries, particularly Colombia, Peru, and even Chile, wrote these rules in their own national constitutions. Of course, we cannot open the Pandora box of a constitutional reform in Argentina, but we will try to do very, very tough with a legal engineer or legal scheme that we will use in the central bank charter, in order to avoid any possibility of the future authorities of the central bank to impose capital controls or print money for the treasury. And I think that will be key for the stabilization going forward. You need to have in Argentina two conditions that we never have or we had only in many short periods of our history, which is to have fiscal equilibrium with an independent central bank. If we do that, we will be able to reduce inflation very fast during the first years, or maybe during the first months of our government.
Luciano, we've talked about spending cuts and in depth about capital controls. I want to turn to structural reform, if you would. There are critics of the current Argentine IMF program that say it really should have required significant changes to Argentina's tax laws, to its labor code, to trade policy, to the pension system, all in various states of disequilibrium, all inhibiting Argentina's economic competitiveness and its growth prospects. Is structural reform, in your mind, necessary for the short or medium term? Do you expect the next president, if it's Patricia Bullrich, to have congressional support for serious, meaningful structural reform? And would the kinds of reforms I'm referring to provoke the kinds of social upheaval that would make it difficult to carry them out and implement them, even if you did control the lower house and the Senate?
Good question. Well, yes, I think we need to start our government with this, with a couple of structural reforms that will, in my view, will not be unpopular. We can talk about that. The first one, because I remember we want to create the conditions to benefit from the huge positive international context Argentina will have in the very short term, and of course in the medium term. And to do that, we need to change the business climate just from the beginning. And so we are elaborating basically 3 reforms that we will send to the Congress. The first one is a law for investment protection from capital-intensive investment, the protection for capital investment project in Argentina. We are thinking about projects of $100 million, above $100 million, and we will give to these projects basically 3 benefits. The first one is tax benefits, basically VAT reimbursement, fast reimbursement, and faster amortization, tax amortization for investment. The second one is fiscal stability, taking as precedent the investment protection law of the mining sector of 1993. We can talk about that in a minute. I think we'll have a Supreme Court ruling that will favor companies in order to, seal the approval for fiscal stability according to this, according to the 1993 law. And I think that would be a great judicial and legal precedent for future investments in Argentina. So we will give them fiscal stability, and the third condition is full access to the FX. Full access to the FX is the same we'll give to all Argentinians as soon as we can exit capital controls. And we will write that rule in the new central bank charter of Argentina. But we will also give this stability condition and access to FX to all investors in Argentina, but not only to key sector of the economy, particularly oil and gas or green hydrogen or mining. No, we will give them to all the sectors of the economy that want to invest in Argentina in order to improve the business climate and the investment security and investment stability in Argentina. The second structural reform is a labor reform, will be basically focused on reducing the judicial litigation costs. The litigation costs of Argentina that are huge and are a contingent liability for corporations. Every time you create a job, you start to have you have to have in your accounting a contingent liability because of the judicial claims you will have in the future. So we'll tackle that problem just from the beginning. And the third one is a deregulation and simplification decree we have been working for during the last year, looking for all the measures and regulations and law that were created in the last 20 years in order to reduce total factor productivity of the economy, reduce investment, reduce competition, reduce innovation in the Argentine economy. We will be tackle these 3 issues in order to improve the investment climate in Argentina just from the beginning. In my view, and I will go to the second part of your question, which is the political implication of these reforms. In my view, only the labor reform could create some tensions with part of the unions, particularly those unions that are very related or close to the Kirchnerism. But in a way, the spirit and the objective of our reform are shared or are supported not only by businessmen, but also with union leaders, because the judicial industry, as we say here in Argentina, the labor litigation industry here in Argentina is a big problem, not only for corporations, but also for a small and medium size enterprise, but also for some reasonable, rational union leaders that knows that they will have a stagnant private employment in the last 10 years, and they are suffering because of that. And also their unions are suffering because of that. So I think even we will have some, of course, rhetorical tensions, debates about this reform. When you take the three reforms to account, they will not have, in my view, a huge social and political cost. And also, a reason for that is that just from the beginning, unions will know that we will have the numbers at the Congress to pass the reform. So we will have a big room for negotiating with them a reasonable reform that will also help to improve the labor conditions in Argentina without having a huge tension with unions, at least in the key elements that they are more worried about. And that, what I think is that right now, Juntos por el Cambio has close to 113 representatives at the lower house. In a reasonable election, we will probably improve to 120, only 9 representatives to have a quorum. I think we'll have a good conversation with the libertarians, the people like Diana Mondino, which is a luxury that to have her at the Congress, for example. And right now Juntos por el Cambio have 33 senators, and with the change in the political sign of San Luis and San Juan, we'll be closer to have 35 senators, only 2 senators to have quorum and control the Senate during the next 4 years. So that I think that will be a key element in order to improve governability and also to reduce social tensions at the beginning, because in many ways, political tensions created by the Kirchnerism are in a way a function of your political weakness at the Congress. If you have the numbers to post, then they have to sit and talk, negotiate. And I think we'll have the numbers to pass these 3 reforms without any problems. And also a labor reform in Argentina right now is part of the common sense of the population, because all the political leaders, as the social leaders, knows that we have to tackle some reforms in order to improve the conditions to create jobs in Argentina, and also reduce the contingent liability created by every job you create at the private sector. So my view is that we'll have the political support, we'll have the numbers at both chambers of the Congress, and we'll have the social support to push this reform just from the beginning.
Yeah, let me, if you permit me to just focus on the social aspect of this just for one more moment. I mean, what you've laid out does sound like a lovely and productive way to manage reforms through negotiations and congressional debate. I think there's a lot of people who are skeptical that that is how it would play out in Argentina, that Patricia Bullrich's more confrontational style, that the resistance from unions and their capacity to bring about national strikes, that social movements that are very skilled at mobilizing their members to disrupt life, at least in the city of Buenos Aires, would all come together and create a real governability challenge, if not a social and political crisis, if the reforms that you're describing are promoted very quickly in a new administration. So I just want to ask you one more time, if you think the most likely scenario would be kind of a peaceful and professional negotiation with unions and the opposition, or whether you would face real social tensions.
Well, regarding the legal reforms we are talking about, of course, we'll have some conversation tensions with the unions, particularly those related to the Kirchnerism. You should expect that just from the beginning. But I think at the end of the day, these reforms will not be part of the main challenge of the government. What I think it will be a real challenge, of course, all the transitions of the macroeconomy until we get to the second stage of our program, which is the stabilization program itself, because that. Of course, in order to improve macroeconomic conditions, you need to exit capital controls, and that will probably imply, tensions on the FX market and probably a realignment of local prices at the beginning, prices and wages, not only prices and wages. So, and I think that could probably be part of the tension. But I think that the key difference with the previous experience of Macri, I think the social consensus right now is quite clear in the sense that this model is completely ended, and that we need to change, and that probably the transition to a new model of stability and growth will require some adjustment at the beginning, at the very first months of the government. And I think also that the situation is quite different to this type of social tensions we suffered promoted by the Kirchnerism during the December 2017. Why? First of all, it was not clear at the society that the populist government was a failure in Argentina, and that will get the Argentina to this mess that we are suffering right now. The second one is once again the lack of control of both chambers of the Congress. The problem of Argentina after the political crisis created or engineered by the Peronist party or the Kirchnerism during the end of 2017 was not only the social tensions itself, that was once again was part of the machinery of the Peronists, of the Kirchnerism at that time, but basically that we had a zombie government after that, because we lose the control of both chambers, because we had to negotiate at that time with the Peronists in order to pass any law. So after that, we had a zombie government, and the same that is happening right now in Chile, for example, with a weak government without majority at the Congress, or even happening in Colombia with Duque after the crisis, and so on and so forth. This time around, the situation will be completely different just from the beginning. First of all, because this social consensus about the failure of the populist government, and the second one is that even if the Kirchnerism promote social unrest, demonstration, and so on and so forth, will keep the majority at both chambers, and in a way probably will strengthen the majority at both chambers, because it's quite clear that this model has come to an end and that we need to change, not only for the society, for the political leaders, for representatives, for senators, for governors at all the provinces. So my view is that if we have the leadership and the determination of Patricia Bullrich to muddle through this process, we'll be able to stabilize the economy very soon and put the economy to growth very fast.
Luciano, we focused a lot on some of the doom and gloom that would greet the next president of Argentina, but it strikes me that Argentina has some significant potential tailwinds in the coming years. You've mentioned a few of these. I'll mention those and others. There's rising global demand for the food Argentina produces, for the energy it produces and could produce, the minerals for low carbon technologies, including lithium and copper that are needed for batteries and electric vehicles. My question is, strategically speaking, how would Patricia reassure investors that Argentina is a safe place to put their capital to take advantage of these opportunities? You've given a few examples of this about favorable tax policies for investments above $100 million, more guarantees of stability in the tax code, access to foreign exchange. But I have to recall that President Macri had promised this lluvia de inversiones, this, there would be raining down a flood of foreign investment in Argentina that ultimately didn't arrive at the scale he had promised. And a lot of the investment that did arrive ended up not producing the profits that those investors had been promised. And so it strikes me that you, if you're leading the economic team, and Patricia Bullrich, if she's the new president, would have a lot of work to do to reassure investors that Argentina is a safe place to put capital. What would be the approach beyond some of the specific strategies you mentioned in terms of policies?
No, I think the strategies I mentioned are key. And let me elaborate on what I was mentioning about the investment protection law, because I think it is key. And let me tell you that this is a quite different scenario compared to 2016. We have the lluvia de inversiones, we have this investment rate, but it was a financial investment. As I mentioned, I received a lot of people coming from Wall Street that they want to buy bonds. But when you talk with local corporations and local businessmen, they were very skeptical about the future of Argentina, and even they were skeptical about the sustainability of the political process of Macri's administration. At the beginning of Macri, it was very common to listen to people saying, well, Macri is a transition government. He will probably not end his period because the crisis will be huge and the Peronists is in the middle, and so on and so forth. That was not, unfortunately, that didn't happen. But the truth is that the situation was quite different. Today, when I talk with real investors, not only foreign investors, but also local investors, they are talking about putting a lot of $1 billion in key projects that will help in the very short term to stabilize the situation and to create a new engine for growth in Argentina. During the last century, the only sustainable engine of growth in Argentina was the agricultural sector. Of course, we killed the agricultural sector because the Peronists used natural resources in order to promote, the populist government. They want to tax natural resources in order to, distribute social plans at the Great Buenos Aires. That's the plan of the Peronist Party. Not the Peronist Party. Let me say this in a different way. Of the Kirchnerism, because I think there are many rational Peronism around the country. And I think they have a completely different view of the country in the future of that has Cristina Kirchner. But now we'll have not only this classical engine of growth of export and dollars for Argentina that are the agricultural sector, but now we will have oil and gas, and we have lithium, and we have copper, and in the future green hydrogen, and we'll also benefit from the reshoring of many corporations related to energy intensive projects, like the Polo Petroquímico Bahía Blanca, for example, that will benefit for a huge growth, because we will have in the future this amazing comparative advantage of cheap energy at a cost that will be similar to that of Texas and maybe lower, because we have at Vaca Muerta the productivity of the first 10% of the project at Texas. So I think that will create a quite different conditions at the beginning compared to Macri's. That's the first point. And of course, one of the main problems of Argentina is that we don't have any rule of law in Argentina because of the problem of populism and all the change in the rule of the game in Argentina. That's why we will use the precedent of the Mining Protection Law of 1993 in order to create a judicial structure to protect investment projects in the future. Let me talk for a minute about that. Of course, the mining investment protection law of 1993 was also violated by the Kirchnerism. So the corporations went to the courts, and now they have a Supreme Court ruling that is giving them the right and giving them a positive ruling for corporations. Right now it's an intermediate point. So the tax agency is computing the fiscal damage for the violation of the fiscal stability. And after that, the Supreme Court ruling will probably rule in favor, the Supreme Court will rule in favor of the companies. So after that, we will have a clear legal precedent for the constitutionality of the right to fiscal stability created by the Mining Code of 1983. So we will replicate this precedent for all investment, capital-intensive projects for all the sectors of the economy. And I think that will create probably the main conditions real investors are requiring to start to invest in Argentina. And that's why I think we'll try to pass this law with a huge majority at both chambers in order to benefit all the country with this law. Let me add a point which I think it's important, which is as a part of this reform and this protection law for investment protection, we will require the provinces to support this law in order to give fiscal stability at the provinces and the cities. Why? Because if we can avoid the confiscation of investment at the national level, but if we don't have fiscal stability at the province, you can be confiscated by the provinces. So our idea is that try to get the support of this law in all the provinces, and we will need the support and the push of the private sectors, particularly local investors, talking with governors, representatives, and senators in order to pass this reform and to adhere to this reform in order to benefit from this reform at these provinces. So that's basically the political engineering we are thinking about to pass this reform that, in my view, could be a game changer, if you want, in terms of investment in Argentina going forward.
Luciano, as I mentioned in my introduction, we recently interviewed Diana Mondino. She said that Javier Milei and Juntos por el Cambio agree on 95% of economic policy issues. My question is whether you share that view. I know Patricia and Miele seem to get along, but Miele has a relatively extreme platform. It includes plans to shut down the central bank, to dollarize the economy, to privatize state-owned enterprises, including some iconic companies like Aerolíneas Argentinas and YPF, YPF, the national oil company. You know, what are the fundamental areas of disagreement between Juntos por el Cambio and in particular between Patricia Bullrich's economic ideas and those of Javier Milei?
Well, I think there is a common diagnosis about Argentina, which is the huge increase of public spending due to the Kirchnerism that was only reduced during the 4 years of Macri administration. So the need to reduce the public spending in terms of GDP in the future, I think it's also related to the tax pressure, of course. Tax reform is, of course, a priority in Argentina, but we can only reduce taxes pari passu with the reduction of public spending, because in order to avoid the crisis and in order to reduce, of course, the need to tackle financial markets or to print money for the treasury. So I think there is a common diagnosis. There is some different tools, and probably we will disagree with the idea of eliminating the central bank, because we need a lender of last resort and we need some kind of flexibility, because we are a commodity exporter, that we suffer from time to time external shocks that amplify real turbulence if you have a fixed exchange rate, as it is the case with the dollarization process. So that we have a different view there. We think it will be possible in the future to restore the credibility on the peso if we deliver fiscal equilibrium plus an independent central bank. And so I think we will probably be a natural allies at the Congress in many of these reforms we are talking about, because what we want is basically to benefit the private sector in order to create jobs and to increase export and increase investment. And in order to do that, we need to basically eliminate all the laws and regulations created during the Kirchnerism. So we'll probably agree in that, and I think that they will be part of the solution of Argentina in the future. I think Javier Milei will have a critical role in the sense that his party could be able to be part of the key structural reforms that Argentina needs in order to restore growth and stability.
You didn't mention privatizations. How does the campaign view? How does the campaign view some of Javier Milei's promises to privatize important state-owned enterprises?
Sorry. I have some unstable internet here, but okay. Regarding privatization, what we think is that public corporations, public state-owned corporations, they have to be in equilibrium in the sense that you cannot expect any peso of taxpayer in an airplane or even in other corporations. So that will be the golden rule of the management of public state-owned corporations. We don't have an ideological view regarding the retarding public owned corporations in the sense that we think it is a premature debate in Argentina, in the sense that even inside our coalition, we have different views regarding that. What is a clear consensus that we will try to impose just from the beginning is that you cannot spend or waste any peso to subsidize high wages at an airplane, at a public state, at a public-owned state airplane. So, air corporation, sorry. So that's why that is a clear consensus inside Juntos por el Cambio. And after that, without this golden rule, we will be able to debate what is the best for Argentina in the future. If it is to have these corporations, particularly the many small corporations are not very relevant for the Argentine economy, or keep them as public companies. So I don't want to anticipate a clear view about that. Of course, I have my own views, but I don't think it is a clear consensus inside Juntos por el Cambio. What it is clear is that, once again, that we cannot waste any peso in subsidizing these state-owned corporations in the future. And I think that is a clear consensus that we will have to, respect just from the beginning.
Luciano, we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask you two questions at once, including a question I received from a member of our audience here. The first question relates to Argentina's constantly multiplying exchange rates. These are, of course, a subject of international fascination. They have these recognizable names like the Coldplay dollar, the Qatar dollar, the dólar soja, the tourism dollar. The question is the best approach to unifying Argentina's exchange rates. You've mentioned your views of capital controls, and so maybe you've explained a bit of this approach. And the second question is about the export taxes on commodities. You mentioned previously that you have an interest in tax reform, but that you recognize that it has to come hand in hand with significant decreases in public spending. Yet the export taxes on commodities, something that Mauricio Macri addressed very early on, are seen as a real disincentive for investment in really important economic drivers, including soy, for example. And so would those also have to wait for fiscal reform, or would there be some more swift action on the high export taxes on important Argentine commodities? So the question is unifying the exchange rate, and the second question is on export taxes on commodities.
Well, regarding the first question, we think we need to exit capital controls very fast. The sooner the better. Of course, if you eliminate capital controls without any credibility, Argentina could suffer a hyperinflation. So we want to rule out that possibility. If you if Argentina exits capital controls with low credibility, we will probably suffer an acceleration of the rate of inflation. And if we can put a program just from the beginning in order to restore credibility with a credible fiscal path, with a reform of the state, at least a new law that will create the conditions for a gradual reform of the state, a reduction of public spending, which will require the government to deliver these reforms just from the beginning. If we have an agreement with the IMF and the support of the IMF, we can build the conditions to restore some credibility in Argentina, and we will probably be able to exit capital control soon at the beginning, and we will probably experiment a realignment of prices and wages in a transition. And inflation probably will start to come down if we can put this program in place. So that's our strategy. We'll try to do the best for Argentina just from the beginning. We will not expect or wait for 1 year in order to rebuild credibility under the assumption that to wait 1 year will be better for the Argentina that do the reform just from the beginning, because I don't think that is a clever strategy going forward. Of course, we will have to do or to implement this exit strategy, taking into account all the risks we will have to face at the beginning. We will not risk a hyperinflation in Argentina. We will not put at risk the Argentine economy. We'll try to do our best, and our effort and our objective is to exit capital control very fast. We cannot rule out any measure at the beginning, in the sense that we can, implement a dual exchange regime if it is a reasonable strategy in a transition toward, fiscal equilibrium. That could be a reasonable tool in the very short term. But our objective is to anticipate the reforms and to accelerate the reform. And I think the economy will not grow without with the cepo, with capital controls, and inflation will not start to go down if we continue with these kind of measures. And also, we don't have the dollars, the effects in order to keep this system. During this year, we lost $18 billion of international reserve in order to keep this mess. So I don't think it's a clever strategy to keep this for 1 year more, for more 1 year. So that's what we think. So the plan is once again to have a consistent plan, an agreement with the IMF, and we expect the support of all the global community in order to help and support a rational government that will try to push and pass reforms that are very courageous, if you want, just from the beginning. And that's the plan. And we will do with technical, of course, with the analytical tools we need and the legal tools we need to try to muddle through the transition in a very reasonable way. But we have to do that very fast just from the beginning.
Luciano,
regarding export tax. Yeah.
No, go ahead with export taxes quickly, and then I have one last question for you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Export tax is quite clear. We will try to, of course, we need to, in order to reduce taxes, we need to reduce, before reducing taxes, we need to reduce spending in terms of GDP. And so we need to deliver on that before reducing taxes. But at the beginning of our government, we will try to give the agricultural sector a clear sign of our commitment with export tax reduction. We will do that by law, and we will, negotiate and try to put a gradual approach for the reduction of export taxes by law, in order to give the agricultural sector a clear sign and some, legal commitment to the reduction of export taxes. And I think that will be a very good way to tackle this problem. We want to eliminate export taxes without, of course, a very uncommon tax around the reasonable countries in the world. So we will do that by law at the beginning of our government, and we will try to negotiate the trend of the reduction with the export sector in order to give them the possibility to invest and export in Argentina.
Luciano, you mentioned the important role that the international community will play during this stabilization program. I'm speaking to you from Washington, where clearly there's a lot of capital that could be invested in Argentina. There is the possibility of important support at the International Monetary Fund from the United States. But I have to recognize the United States is not the only relevant international actor in Argentina right now. And in fact, China has been an increasingly important player in Argentina, not only in the last 20 years through investment in Argentina and through the Chinese market for Argentine commodities, but recently through this very significant loan, this line of credit from the Chinese central bank. My question for you is foreign policy or foreign economic policy. How would a Patricia Bullrich government manage the dynamics between the United States, Argentina, and China, navigating the rivalry between the United States and China, and making sure Argentina can benefit from both relationships?
Difficult question. Well, I think the political relationship with Washington is quite clear, in the sense that we will need the support of the United States and also of all the countries that are relevant to have a new agreement with the IMF. And we also have a constructive relationship with China. We need to trade with them. I think they could be part of the of many or some projects in terms of infrastructure in the future. But I think it is quite clear that for Patricia Bullrich and even for Juntos por el Cambio in general, our values are quite clear in terms of the role of democracy, free capitalism around the world. And I think that will not change. Of course, we'll need to trade with all the countries in the world. We need our people to benefit from trade. We need to open our trade and to open other markets. We need to, of course, reinforce our agreement with the European Union. I think that will be a key part of our foreign policy or trade policy going forward. That will create a new order for Argentina, and will continue to, of course, to talk in trade issues with the United States. I think the era is a possibility to reopen some conversation about trade between the States and Argentina, and I think we'll have to explore that possibility. But once again, I think a good governor for the Argentinians will need to have good dialogue with all the countries, but I think, once again, the values of democracy and free capitalism will have to be at the front page of any conversation with the rest of the world. And I think that makes us, in our values, political views, and even geopolitical views, very close to, of course, to the United States and to many countries that want, once again, free democracy and capitalism, a free market capitalism around the world.
Muchas gracias, Luciano. Este ha sido una conversación muy interesante y un gran valor y honor para nosotros. Thank you very much for being part of the Argentina Elige series. As I mentioned earlier, our next dialogue in this series will take place on Tuesday, August 8th, where we'll be speaking to Martín Redrado about Horacio Rodríguez Larreta's views. This was an enormously helpful look at Patricia Bullrich's vision for stabilization and economic recovery and growth in Argentina. We greatly appreciate your time, Luciano.
Thank you, Benjamin. My pleasure.
Ciao, un abrazo.
Ciao, abrazo. Adiós.